Here are 20 tips to improve your mix down instantly. Let's get it. Okay, so tip number 1 would be to cut unnecessary frequencies. I know this is obvious, but it really helps and it really has a powerful meaning and it has a lot of importance to it. So if you cut unnecessary frequencies in every sound, your mix will be just as clean as possible, and that will lead up to a great mix. So that is necessary, that's why it's the number 1 tip. Tip number 2 would be that to always make sure your sub bass is mono. However, not all of your low end needs to be in mono. For example, I would say around 60 Hz or 60 to 100 Hz, all that will have to be in mono, because you know when people play your song in parties and festivals and stuff, most likely the sound systems there use mono sound systems, and sub bass is very important. If the sub bass is stereoized, the sub bass will sound weird and it will not sound good on the sound system, trust me. So for that, at a certain frequency, I would say like 60 to 100, your low end from there should be mono. However, you can, add mid bass, a lot of basses that are stereoized, and give width to your track. Here's some examples of tracks that does not have a fully low end mono. Take a listen. Okay, so here I have a professionally produced track by Charlie Puth, and of course it is a hit, so that means it is a commercial song, and so that means that it's well mixed. I'm gonna play it now. I'm gonna show you how the low end is not fully completely mono. Take a listen. You can see the spectrum here. It's not fully mono. Fully mono is like this. This is not fully mono. So that's one example. Another example is a track by Valentino Khan, Pump. Everyone knows this track. Of course, again, it is a hit and every DJ played it. So that means it's well mixed and it's signed on Skrillex's label, if that is not enough. So take a listen, look at the bass line. Look at how wide it is. Look. That's so wide. That's even the sub bass is stereo. That's crazy. So for that, guys, I suggest you make your bass partially mono, not fully mono. A lot of you guys are gonna debate with me on this, but you can always be creative. There's no rules to music. Okay, tip number 3 would be to use reverb to reach different sound results, sound design wise. You can use reverb. I use it a lot to smoothen out my sound. If a sound sounds harsh, I will use reverb with very short decay, with full wetness, or the deserved amount of wetness in the reverb, to make the sound smoother. Here's an example. Okay, as you can see here, I have a sound that sounds like this. As you can hear, it is very gritty sound, it's not a smooth sound. With using reverb in a certain way, I can reach different results. And if I wanted to smoothen out the sound, I use Valhalla Room for this. I lower the decay and I make the mix 100%, and it sounds like this now. You see how it's now more smooth and more stereoized, and that's basically it. You can use the reverb to reach different results. Tip number 4 is also about reverb, and that would be about sidechaining or automating reverb. And that is good for different reasons. Number 1, when you automate or sidechain the reverb, you can control the reverb however you want, and that way it will not interfere with your sounds when they are playing. So again, here's an example in FL Studio. Okay, so here I have a loop from a Vengeance sample pack. It sounds like this. Okay, so there is basically 2 ways of controlling the reverb. There is reverb, sidechain reverb, and I will make this now. First of all, you need to open up a peak controller from FL Studio. Here it is. And as you can see, peak controller triggers the input of the sound, and you can use any type of reverb. For this example, I'm gonna use just FL Studio's stock reverb plugin. FL Studio Reverb 2. I want to make the wet knob go down when the sound plays, and when it stops I need it to raise. So how can I do that? Well, basically I just click here on the witness knob, right click, link to controller, and select an internal controller here, peak. After that, on the mapping formula I click inverted, and what that does is whenever the peak controller receives a signal from the from the sample, receives an input, it will trigger that button to go down because we chose inverted. So if, let's say, I play now, it will sound like this, you see, but we don't want that much reverb. So how can I lower the wetness knob? If I lower it, that will not solve the problem. It will return to its default position, you see, basically by controlling the bass knob here. Look at the wetness knob right here when I control it. So I want it about here, and I want the volume to be aggressive, so it sounds like this, see, and I will shorten the decay, maybe lower the volume a bit. The decay is the time that it needs the reverb to get back up. If I increase the decay, it will get back up faster. If I slower the decay, it will take time for the reverb to return. So I will put it around here. As you can see, you have a clean, controlled reverb. That's the first way. Now for the second way, you can just do it normally. You can automate the reverb. Again, using Fruity Reverb, you can just automate the reverb and control the wetness. You can do stuff like this. Maybe a little bit here. As you can see, it works also that way. And when to use which way, I'd rather say it depends. It depends. I use them both. When I want the reverb to control it manually, I will use automation. When I want to control the reverb manually, I will use automations. When I want everything to be, constant and be controlled automatically, I will use peak controllers. So yeah, guys, be creative. Tip number 5 would be that to always have one mono lead or one main lead when you're layering your leads. Tip number 6 would be to always check your mix in mono, or in other words, mono compatibility. And why do you need to do that? Because when you check your mix in mono, as I said earlier, you now can have an image on what is your mix gonna sound like when it's played in mono. And if it sounds good in mono, then you have no worries if it can get played on any speaker system. If it sounds good in mono, that means it will also sound good pretty much anywhere, in a mall, in a festival, on your phone, anywhere. Now tip number 7 would be that to always pan stuff in your mix. For example, percussions, background leads, background vocals, pads, pretty much everything. If you can pan something or add extra layers that are panned, that will give your mix more depth and more dimension, Now for tip number 8, it would be all about using glue compressors on buses. Lead buses, chord buses, bass buses, any bus. Just use glue compressors to make your sounds sound as a one sound. Now tip number 9 is sort of a trick in mixing that you can achieve sounds using that trick, and that would be about ADLIB vocals, using flangers on ADLIB vocals. What that means is when you have more layers on vocals, when you have your background layers, your ADLIB layers, pretty much vocal layers, you can use on one of them layers, you can use flangers, but don't overdo it. Flangers always give that stereo depth sounding feel, to the sound. So yeah, that trick is used by a lot of famous rappers or artists. So you can use it yourself. Here's an example. Okay, so I have a random vocal sample right here that I just duplicated the same sample and applied a flanger on it with some form and pitch shifting. And now it sounds more wide. Take a listen.
I miss you, miss you, miss you. I miss you so.
As you can see, the vocal has now more dimension to it and more depth. Tip number 10. Reference your track with professionally mixed tracks. I know you heard this everywhere. If you heard it everywhere, then it means that it's important, and really it is. Reference tracks can be helpful because if you are referencing your track with a professionally mixed track, your ear can compare the two tracks together and tell the difference if your track is sounding good or not. So for that, use reference tracks. Now tip number 11 would be all about using that glorious OTT. No, for real though, OTT is a sick-ass free plugin, effect plugin that you can download. And no, I'm not sponsored by the way, but you can download it. It's an amazing tool. I use it on almost every sound. It gives that depth and that tightness. It adds that tightness to your sound, and it rises up the high end a bit. And it's a sick-ass compressor. It has 3 stuff in it. It has upward compression, downward compression, and EQ. So it has all 3 components combined into one free magical plugin. Tip number 12. Use compressors with slow attacks on your kicks to achieve more punchiness. FL Studio, take it back. Okay, so I have a kick right here from Kashmir Sample Pack. I just open up a compressor from FabFilter. And why do you need to compress your kicks with slower attacks? And why it adds clickiness? Because when you slower the attack, the compressor will start on making the effect more later, In this case, it's by 10 milliseconds, 10.552 milliseconds. So when I play, as you can see the wave, you can see the peak of the kick. You can see the peak of the kick. After that, this red line is how the compressor is reacting. So the attack is kind of peaky, and the red line pushed the rest of the body of the kick. So now take a look if I make the attack hit fast. You see the attack is less clicky. If I make it like this, you can see the spike is much sharper. If I make it like this, the spike is more shorter, and that means that it's not as clicky and it's compressing the whole kick. And that's not what you want. What you want in a kick is a slow attack with, depends how much ratio and threshold, depends on the kick itself, if it needs compression or not. But in general, when you're compressing a kick, you need a slow attack combined with a faster release in order that the compressor will return faster to its default position. Because if you slower the release, the compressor will let go of the kick or let go of compressing the kick much later. So you need it to be fast. That way it's more punchy. Without it, it sounds more, let off the leash, I would describe it. And if you apply the compressor, it's much more controlled in my opinion. Okay, tip number 13 is about using filters. Again, so simple yet so powerful tip. Using filters can help you again achieve different sounds. When making a build-up, for instance, you can use a high cut filter to open up the lead slowly and introduce it, letting the listener know an idea on what is going to happen next. So for that, filters is a great way to build tension really, and just sound design and reach different results. So for that, use filters. Tip number 14. Use stereo enhancers. Imagine your mix as a room, okay? You need to not put all the sounds on one side of the room or one place in the room. You need to fill up the room. That's how you approach your mix, in that way. So for that, using stereo shapers can push your sounds back. It can, make your mix a lot more cleaner, because now with using stereo shapers and stereo enhancers, your sounds won't be stacking on top of each other. They will all have their individual space, So for that, I recommend you use stereo shapers, but don't overuse them. That's very important. Otherwise, your track won't sound good in mono. You have a messed up track. That is not good. Be careful. Okay, next tip is kind of different. It works on me. I don't know if it will work on you. And that is tip 15. Always check if you can decrease muddiness. And what does that mean? In my mix downs, at least in my own experience, I always experience muddiness. I always find that my mix has a lot of mids. And why? I don't know if it's my ear that hears, you know, lack of mid always, and I increase them, and that will bring to muddiness. But in general, most of the sounds I use EQ on, I always decrease the mid end. I don't know why, but most sounds tend to have, you know, much mids rather, let's say, highs or lows. So for that, when you're ever layering leads or stuff, make sure you always make a small dip in the mids, just to make sure that your mix doesn't get muddy fast. However, it's not a rule. Don't take it as a rule and apply a bell EQ on the mid on every sound. There are sounds that need mids, but in my case, I experience always muddiness, and muddiness can be very frustrating, especially when you're beginning. If you have mids, or you see that you can lower the mids maybe a bit and not affect the sound and make it dry, just do it. Okay, tip number 16 is about adding delay ping pong to different elements in your mix. Pretty self-explanatory. Tip number 17, use distortion frequently but carefully. Using distortion can glue your sound a lot, and it can also even out the missing frequencies. Like if you have dips or spikes in your frequencies, if that makes sense, the distortion tool can fill up those empty spikes. So for that, make sure you use distortion frequently but carefully. Okay, this tip is about vocals again, but it's very important, and that would be tip number 18, using deezer on vocals. What is a deezer? A deezer is basically a compressor that triggers the high frequencies in vocals, and high frequencies are basically the s sounding sounds in the vocal. So when you use a deezer, you get rid of those annoying s sounds in the vocals. Okay, tip number 19 is always compress your vocals, and here's why. Because we as humans can't sing vocals on a, you know, static, consistent volume. We can't do that. No one can do that. So for that comes the job of the compressor, which is basically to maintain, or, you know, make peaks close to other peaks, if that makes sense. Using a compressor on vocals can really settle down your vocal, and if you have loud singing parts in your vocals that sound louder than other parts, or other parts sound quieter, for example, a compressor will even out those parts and make them sound as much, you know, close to each other as possible. And so for that, compressor can come really handy in those situations. And finally, last but not least, tip number 20, and that is all about developing a critique ear. And what does that mean is basically developing an ear that always hears your mix in a way that it's always looking for, you know, mistakes or critiques your mix. And that is very good. Why? Because if you do that constantly, that will lead you to, you know, adding more stuff and improving your mix more, or making it near perfect. Obviously there is nothing perfect in this world, but you can strive to be the best at everything, including your mixing skills. That's a weird explanation for that, but yeah, developing a critique ear is very important to achieve your best results while mixing. It's not good, however, to be a perfectionist, because it can take a lot of energy from you, but, you know, staying true to yourself, developing a critique ear, always bringing up new points or new critiques can help, definitely. You know what? Here are some bonus tips for you guys, you deserve it. First tip is using volume automations to make your drops hit harder. And what that means, it means basically that you need to control the volumes of different sections of the track. After that, another bonus tip would be that to use analyzing plugins. You remember the reference tracks tip that I gave you? Well, yeah, use those analyzing plugins to help even further when referencing a track. For example, you can analyze the reference track's frequencies and check your frequencies and compare the two images together and see what's missing in your mix, or what's, you know, overdone in your mix. So for that, using analyzers can really help your mix. I use it a lot myself, and I speak from experience. And last bonus tip, of course, it's so obvious, and I want you to leave the video with that tip, is use your ears. There's nothing more accurate than your ears. You can't just depend on reference tracks or on vision, you know. Use your ears, rely on your ears, and by the time goes on, you will develop a great ear for mixing. Okay, so there you have it, 20 tips to improve your mixdowns. Please guys, if you like this video, make sure to drop me a thumbs up and subscribe for more content like this in the upcoming future. Suggest me in the comments what video should I do next. I appreciate all of your guys' support. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram to stay updated when I post new videos, and it will mean a lot to me. Thank you guys a lot for watching again, and stay safe and stay hydrated. Peace.